Before designing icons, it's important to understand why and how they become powerful tools of communication. Semiotics, which is the study of signs, can be very useful to understand that process. Signs are a combination of a thing called a signifier and its meaning, which is called a signified. The signifier can be an object, an image, a word, or even a sound. Icons are one type of sign. The word icon comes from the Greek word eikon, which means an image or likeness that represents something else. In other words, icons are defined by the fact that their meaning closely resembles the actual thing they're trying to represent. The key thing to remember is that a sign is created when the object, image, word, or sound evokes something in a person's mind. Another key thing to remember when designing icons is that a single object can convey many meanings, and that meaning can vary from one culture or geographical location to the next. As an icon designer, you are asked to capture a feeling, something that will trigger an association in people's minds. This is especially delicate and crucial when you're designing icons for an international audience. Let's say you're trying to create icons for a park. In your mind, you might be thinking of benches like these, which might convey the meaning of having a nice rest in the middle of your daily walk through the park. It might also convey ideas of socializing or a nice day. But what about this bench? It might convey a sense of isolation or solitude, as it doesn't seem to be used very often. This might be appealing to some, but less to others. The reading of signs, then, is a personal thing, just like a photo of snow may appeal to some who love winter sports, while those who don't may feel unhappy, or those who've never experienced snow may not get the association at all. We encounter thousands of signs every day, without even noticing. There are many different types of signs, but their meaning is always based on a system of shared conventions. Take this icon, often seen on the side of the road in North America, for example. It makes sense within that context, but to inform drivers that food is available at the next exit. But would it make as much sense in a country where people don't use forks and knives to eat? Probably not. In fact, it might lead to confusion. Sometimes icons don't resemble the thing they're trying to convey, but their message is clear because we've been taught to associate that icon with the meaning. Think of the classic representations for public toilets. There's nothing in these signs that indicates a connection with public toilets, but we are taught from a young age what these icons mean, and we know what to look for if stuck in a public place and need to go. While icons are not universal in their meaning, they are very powerful tools to convey information. Now it's time to get our hands dirty, so to speak. In the first section of the course, we're going to look at the different types of icons, their role, and the many conventions that guide their creation, including issues surrounding accessibility. Every day we see and use thousands of icons without even noticing. That's because icons are powerful tools of communication. In order to create icons that successfully convey the right message to the right people, designers must consider a number of key aspects. First, they must think about the type of icons they need to create. Generally, icons belong to one of the following three main categories. The type you choose depends on the message you're trying to convey. If you're trying to represent something that's easily recognizable, you might use a pictogram. The icon, in this case, would be a stylized version of the original. If you're trying to represent an idea or feeling, you'll have to think about a representation that captures that abstract concept in the minds of people who see the icon. The thumbs up icon, for example, represents approval or a positive feeling about something. Many logos fall into this category. Think of the swoosh in the Nike logo or the heart in the I Love New York logo. The most difficult thing to represent is something that has to be learned. This is where you have to be particularly cautious when you're designing for a multinational audience. The paper recycling symbol, for example, doesn't really mean anything by itself. It was created and submitted by a 23-year-old college student from California for the very first Earth Day in 1970. Since then, it's been associated with the recycling process by convention the world over. Now that you know a little bit more about the main types of icons, you have to start thinking about their purpose. It's important to understand their purpose before you start designing, because it's going to have an impact on the type you choose and the tone, look, and form of the icons. Icons are used for different reasons. They can be used for navigation purposes. Many websites use icons in combination with words. The travel site Expedia does this well in its search box, and Zoho also uses a combination of words and icons to guide visitors to information on their various services. Icons can also replace words entirely, but only if the icons are well known and don't need the support of words. Rock legend Blondie's website does this very well. The same is true for icons designed for mobile devices where space is limited. These icons are usually a mix of modified versions of company logos or descriptive renditions of available features that serve as signposts to access the apps. On responsive websites, menu items may start as text but transform into icons when space is reduced. Some icons are used to add visual interest or break up blocks of text. This website uses icons to highlight the 3 types of experience they offer. The icons are not necessary, and they don't depict these paths particularly, but they add color and interest. Here's another example. This image could be used to represent the concept of communication or the Internet of Things. It's filled with icons, but they're only used for their graphical or visual value. Finally, some icons can be used both for their visual value and for informational purposes. This image from a print magazine was used to provide an interesting visual to go with an article on cybersecurity. It also serves an informational purpose for those who aren't familiar with the threats encountered by those who try to protect against cybercrime. Now, you might have noticed, as we've been looking at icons, certain patterns in the way they're used and the way they look. That's because most icon designers follow certain conventions. Conventions are essential to ensure that icons are used in the same way consistently, which helps users or readers understand their meaning quickly and efficiently. You can also save your client or yourself a lot of money on translation costs if your goal is to reach an international audience. Here are some classic conventions. The magnifying glass usually indicates a search field or feature. The home icon usually represents a link back to the home page. Finally, the print icon usually represents a shortcut to print something. There are many other icons that have earned the status of convention or are in the process of doing so, such as the shopping cart on e-commerce sites, social media logos turned into icons, and the first aid icon, just to name a few. Using conventional icons doesn't mean you're stuck with someone else's interpretation. Even when asked to design conventional icons, you can be creative, as you can see here, as long as you respect the core message that needs to be transmitted by these icons. If you stray too far from the conventional depiction, you risk losing all the benefits of using these icons. More creative and less conventional icons can also be used for specialized audiences, as long as they represent something that makes sense in that context. For example, a website for the Olympic Games could use a series of icons representing each sport. Now it's time to talk about form, unity, and recognizability, three important concepts in icon design. Let's look a little more closely at the two social network icon sets. What do you notice? Although they try to convey the same message, that they have a presence on all these networks, they're very different in their form. The icons in the top set are 2D, black and white, and square with rounded corners. The bottom set uses color to make a connection between the icon and the network they represent. The icons are round and have more depth because of the effect used by the designer to make them less flat. That said, they also have things in common. They both use clear and simple depictions and pass the unity and recognizability tests. The importance of recognizability is obvious. When designing icons, you should always ask yourself whether people seeing them will be able to know what they're for in seconds. But unity is just as important. When designing a suite of icons, it's crucial to make sure that they match in terms of form and look. The user starts knowing what to look for. If every icon looks different, the user will be hopelessly confused. The same comment goes for icons that are too different than the document or website they appear in, for example. We'll have a much closer look at these concepts when we start planning, sketching, and designing in other sections of this course. The last concept we need to cover in this section is accessibility. As a designer, you should always be mindful of the diversity of people who might interact with your work. Their age and their level of experience with the web and apps, for example, might vary. Some users may not be able to see, hear, or read well or at all because of disabilities. It doesn't mean that you have to throw creativity out the window. On the contrary, thinking about disability should only make your work better. That said, you do have to be careful about a few things. Provide labels for your icons when possible to ensure those who have visual impairments have access to a text-only version of your work. Pay particular attention to contrast when choosing colors. It's easy to forget when designing icons out of context that they should also be easy to see on the background they will be used on. We'll look at contrast ratios in the planning section of this course. Icons can also be used to enhance a website or an app's accessibility features. For example, many websites use color to indicate when a field in a form has been left blank or filled incorrectly, as you can see in these examples. This is great for a majority of users, but for those who are colorblind or have low vision, the color may not be visible. Some websites add text to fix that problem, like Behance has done here. But the use of icons makes the problematic fields even more obvious for those with visual disabilities. In this section, we looked at some key aspects to consider before and during the process of designing icons. We saw three main types of icons: pictograms, ideograms, and symbols, and talked about their use. We also learned about the various purposes behind the use of icons and how that impacts their design. Finally, we learned to recognize variances in forms and talked about the importance of conventions, unity, recognizability, and finally, accessibility. You've been asked to create icons, but you don't know where to start? If you watched the previous section of this course about basic icon principles, you've already started reflecting on the type and purpose of your icons. You also know that you have to follow certain conventions and pay attention to a number of key aspects to ensure unity, recognizability, and accessibility. In this section, we're going to talk about inspiration and look at a few options to get your creative juices flowing. Where you go to find inspiration often depends on the icons you have to design. Let's look at a few case studies. Imagine you have to design icons for a new transit system, which includes bus, subway, and commuter train services. Because it's a brand new system, your client is concerned that commuters might get confused and wants you to represent each option in the most realistic way possible. In this case, your inspiration should come directly from the source. Because the client wants realistic depictions, you should probably use pictograms of the real thing. Let's look at another case. The client is a chain of stores selling baby-related products. They already have a suite of icons, and while they want to revamp them, they don't want to change them so drastically that their customers won't recognize them anymore. In this case, your primary source of inspiration is the original suite of icons. But obviously, if you were hired, it's because the client wants a new take on the existing icons. The problem is that the previous designer is not likely to hand you the original files. That means you have to play detective and try to reverse engineer every little detail. Sort of like taking a step back before you can move forward. The client is especially interested in appealing to a more urban clientele, as they plan to expand in larger cities. In this case, you might want to look at companies that appeal to young urban families to get a sense of their aesthetic. From there, you can decide what to keep of the original and what to get rid of. In this case, the colors and shape of the icons were changed, but the main images remain. They were all placed at the same angle for unity. What if the only thing your client gives you is a list of icons they want? They tell you you have complete freedom when it comes to design. The only parameters are that the icons will be used to navigate to the products on their website and that you use their corporate color. Where would you start? You could start by conducting a search in Google Images. This might help you narrow down an overall theme. For example, you might like the look of building silhouettes and decide to explore that option further. You could also look at a website like Icon Finder. Here again, you get presented with choices, except that this time the results are already icons. Maybe you feel inspired by outline drawings. You quickly check that the site has similar icons for timepieces and public transit, which they do. You could simply buy the icons and use them as the basis for your own icons. You could colorize them with the client's corporate color, fill them, or render them in 3D. You could also use them to inspire your own design in a similar style. The advantages of using these wide searches is that they can help you think about the creative direction you want to take. Ultimately, inspiration is a very personal thing. Some designers find inspiration by looking at other design work in their field or not. Others recharge their creative batteries by going on a trip or visiting a museum. Others still prefer to doodle while having coffee or brainstorm with colleagues. In the end, the key is to find what works for you.